Here we go. Today is Sunday, October 1st, 2017, and this is episode 202 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bowen. Joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good afternoon, Jerry. How are you, sir?
I'm super duper. How are you?
I am good, though. I detect you have a wee bit of the con crud, as they say.
Oh, my goodness, do I ever.
Think you picked it up at DerbyCon or on travels?
I'm pretty sure it was at DerbyCon.
Told you to stop licking the doorknobs.
I know, but you know what? When you get past a certain threshold of drunk, you can't stop that sort of thing. So, anyway,
fair enough. But yes, hello, DerbyCon. By the way, just to kind of jump into it, was a wonderfully good time. Dave Kennedy and crew put on a great con. Thank you so much for all the wonderful people we met, too. We met a ton of fans and friends, as I like to think of them. Hopefully they think of us that way, too.
Absolutely. I have to say, I'm pretty sure I met more people in that 2-day span or 3-day span than I've probably met cumulatively over the past year. It was really great. And I I'm really happy that I got to go and meet everybody. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I concur, though. One of my particular highlights, and I'll keep this a little abstract, but we happened to meet some military folks who work in cyber defense who say they listen to the show and have their command listen to the show, which I thought was amazing and made me think, wow, we really need to up our game.
That's right.
But that was incredibly humbling and amazing to hear. But, everybody's great to meet. But that one was kind of like, whoa, I got to step it up.
Absolutely. And, to all the enlisted people, officers and whatnot, thank you for your service and keep doing a good job.
Absolutely.
So anyway, before we get into the show, just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. And tonight they may represent the thoughts and opinions of Sudafed, though. So keep that in mind.
It's always an interesting show when Jerry's on drugs.
Yes, indeed. Sudafed does funny things to me. So let's see. A couple quick things. We're going to be in... Actually, the first thing we'll be at next is the O'Reilly Conference at the end of October, start of November.
Yep, we're running the Ignite track there, which is the...
New York City.
New York City. Yep.
That's right. And then we'll be at the Tactical Edge Conference in Bogota, Colombia. I think it's the end of the first week in March.
As will I. And we're both speaking at that conference. We have keynotes to give.
That's right. I can't believe they're going to let me talk. That's amazing. Anyway.
You got to retest mistakes every so often.
That's true. And then, one more thing before we get in. Thank you very much to our Patreon donors. Your contributions are very, very much appreciated.
They keep us going, and they allow us to avoid sponsors, which is great because we don't have anybody telling us what to say or what we can't say.
That's right. That's what people seem to like about the show. So anyhow, getting into the stories. The first one for today comes from Ars Technica, and the title is CC Cleaner Backdoor Infects Millions. Delivered mystery payload to 40 PCs. So continuing on our apparently never-ending trek of supply chain woes with software, this was about, I guess, a week and a half or so ago. Avast.
We need like a name for this. You know how we used to call website compromises that were meant for people to come to and get compromised watering hole attacks? This needs something like a
shipping container attack.
Maybe like poisoning the spring.
Ooh, I like that.
Because
that's good.
It's corrupting the spring waters. It's something, even it's more than a watering hole. It's before the watering hole.
Right. It's poisoning the spring. I like that.
Like an acid rain attack. Anyway, I'll work on that. I'll come up with a logo and a theme song and a maybe a mascot.
Awesome.
But yes, back to CC Cleaner.
Yeah. So Avast, who is now the proud owner of CC Cleaner, they bought. I don't know if they bought all of Puriform or just CC Cleaner. That part's not clear to me. But anyway, back in.
To be fair, I just threw you off. It's C Cleaner, not CC Cleaner.
C Cleaner. That's right. It was Crap Cleaner, right? That was what it used to stand for.
So it's like calling it an ATM machine.
Fair enough. All right. So C Cleaner bought in July. 28 days later, they started distributing a malware-infected version of the 32-bit version of C Cleaner, and so there was a lot of kind of hoopla back and forth. C Cleaner, by the way, is apparently a lot more popular than I gave it credit for. They say that there's somewhere around 5 million downloads a month, and but apparently not as many downloads of the 32-bit version. So they're saying that there were approximately 2.27 million downloads during the time in which the infected version of C Cleaner was available for download. I think that's
pretty good distribution rate.
Yeah, and that spanned a couple of weeks, I guess. And so anyway, this infected or the malware laden version of C Cleaner was signed, right? It was digitally signed, so it wasn't like it was altered after the fact. By the way, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any public discussion about how that happened.
So the assumption, and to be clear, that's an assumption, is they somehow injected this into the code repository.
Correct.
So pre-compiling, pre-signing, pre-distribution.
Right. But there hasn't been any public acknowledgement of how that happened, or really, I haven't even seen any particular articles about speculating, which is what we usually see.
Breaking news: we're speculating here first, because that's the kind of hard-hitting journalism we do on this show.
That's right. First to speculate.
But the fact that it's signed kind of leads you to believe that it had to have been injected pre, gold image.
Well, I mean, either that or, somebody stole the signing keys and then was able to compromise the download server, which, that seems like an unlikely chain of events. Now, but the other thing that was interesting is that it was, again, only the 32-bit version of it, apparently. And so if somebody had kind of deeply compromised them, I would have expected them to go after the 64-bit version, which I would have thought would have been much more popular. But anyway.
Yeah, maybe, if we could ever find out more about the details, maybe those two code bases were secured somehow differently.
That is very, very likely. Or maybe my data on the 32-bit version is out of date. But anyway, that's also possible. So there was a lot of speculation in the early days of this that all however many millions of systems were now infected with malware. But upon further inspection, the malware actually looked to see if the host it was installed on was a member of one of 25 different companies. And if it was, then it reached out and downloaded a second stage bit of malware from the internet. And once that ran, that apparently launched a third stage, which ran fileless in memory. And as far as we know, at least the kind of the up-to-the-date data I can find, there really isn't any information about what the second and third stage was actually intended to do. Now, we know who the affected parties were, so we can kind of guess that it was probably some attempt at...
So who were some of the targeted organizations?
So we have Samsung, Asus, Fujitsu, Singtel, Intel, VMware, And then there were other companies. Those were the companies, by the way, that upon inspection of a captured CNC server, so after this all came to light, a number of different security companies worked together and with law enforcement, and were able to actually get images of the CNC servers, and they were able to determine that there were these 25 different companies. 12 of them apparently had confirmed installs, and then so it's 40 individual infections spanning 12 different companies. There were also 13 companies that were targeted, but apparently, for whatever reason, they didn't install it. So, yeah, and again, we don't yet know exactly what the malware was intended to do. Based on the targets, I would assume it's some type of industrial espionage type thing. There is some wild and woolly speculation in the second half of the article that points out, based on the time frames that the CNC server was accessed and the time zone set on the server itself, it points to either Russia or China or maybe India, and they also point out that none of those countries were actually represented in the impacted companies. So, but to their credit, by the way, you don't see this often in articles. They do point out that all of this stuff is just speculation and doesn't really prove, in any way who was responsible. So,
yeah, certainly
give them kudos for that.
And as always, attribution is a slippery slope. Do we know exactly how this was identified initially? How this got picked up?
Going back on in some memory, so that was actually if I recall, there was a little bit of controversy about that because the Cisco Talos people, if I recall, put out a blog post saying that they caught it based on some odd behavior,
right?
And but then there was an odd blog post later by Avast, which pointed to an entirely different company called, I think it was Mofisec, if I'm not mistaken. And that I interpreted that as a little bit of a backhand to Cisco.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess where I was going with this too is this is the type of detection I think we need more of for these sorts of really pernicious and difficult to detect attacks of anomalous activity detection, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because this, it's not like this was picked up by AV or whatnot. It was picked up based on something was doing something weird, and people investigated. And that's what I think the future of a lot of this detection and containment technology is going to have to contain is more of this, wow, this is weird behavior that we haven't seen, we should dig into this, as opposed to a known blacklist of bad things. It's just too easy to come up with new and different attacks that have never been seen before to rely on a blacklist or even certain types of behavior. And in this one, especially because this was a signed, trusted piece of code.
Mm-hmm.
So that would get around things like whitelisting of software. That would get around a lot of things that we go to as, hey, this will stop most problems. So this could be a pocket case. It could be a 5 percentile case. I'm not saying throw out the baby with the bathwater in terms of whitelisting of applications, that sort of thing. But we have to start thinking of defense in terms of spotting anomalies. Now, the trouble and the challenge of spotting anomalies is to do that, you have to have a fairly static environment that you know pretty well. Mm-hmm. That you've baselined really well. That's kind of rare. It's a lot easier for a lab environment or a research environment to notice that. It's a lot more difficult for a production environment. But I do think that's probably where we need to focus some attention.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say is I think we have to get out of the hitting the easy button when we see what we believe to be a piece of legitimate software exhibiting some concerning thing and just assuming that it's signed and therefore it must be legitimate. I think if nothing else, the the recent trend of these types of attacks show us that we shouldn't necessarily get into that, fall into that trap, because it's not necessarily, if we see something concerning coming from a legitimate piece of software, it doesn't mean that, that it's necessarily a legitimate activity. So
right.
I think that's important. There were, one other thing that caught my eye in here is they said, well, actually two other things. One was kind of funny. Had this thought. Avast said that they were also impacted by this, so they had a system infected, and I got to wondering, did they download and run Malwarebytes? So that was one, and then the other one was that I know I'm a bad person. We're
gonna get some hate mail on that one.
And then the other one was that they said they scanned, to help identify if any of their customers were still infected. They scanned the cryptographically hashed files belonging to all 260 million users of their software, which is an interesting. Yeah.
Wait. What? Wait.
All right.
What?
Here, let me read it. Avast engineers updated their AV product last Wednesday to detect two-stage infections, and you know what? I was thinking that was CCleaner that was doing that. They're saying that that's their the Avast AV product. So
okay, that makes a lot more sense.
My bad. I'm sorry. Yep.
We'll blame the Sudafed.
Yep.
And the meth.
By the way, I did talk to Bob very briefly, and he let me know that he is seeing a lot of companies coming to the stark realization that their help desks are actually ardent users of CCleaner. Despite
well, sure, it in theory it fixes a bunch of problems, right?
Yeah, but I guess I come from a time when CCleaner caused way more problems than it fixed. Now, maybe
Graybeard.
Maybe times have changed, but holy cow, I was really surprised.
When I was a kid, I compiled my own kernels, and we liked it.
Oh boy!
Uphill, both ways.
In the snow.
In the snow.
That's right. We couldn't afford shoes. Yep. All right, moving on to our next story. This one comes from the Register, and the title is Equifax CEO falls on his sword weeks after CreditBiz admits mega breach.
Oh, this one's ugly. This whole story is ugly.
Yeah, no, this is we talked about this, I think, on our last show, so it's been a couple weeks. This is a couple weeks old, so it's been simmering since then. And since then, by the way, there were I think the latest news as of the last recording were that we knew it was Struts, and we knew that some of their executives had been accused of insider trading. So what's happened since then is that the CISO and the CIO have both resigned, and now with this latest story, the CEO has also resigned. Which,
if my memory serves, is one of the few times we've seen a CEO go in the wake of a cyber incident.
That's right. Absolutely.
So that's interesting. And a lot of people were grousing that, well, now he gets off the hook for cleaning up the problem, and he's got a big package to leave with. And yeah, but this could get other CEOs to think more carefully about these issues and perhaps give more funding and authority to the security teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things it crossed my mind is this breach is finally the thing that all of us in InfoSec have desperately wanted for our management FUD slides. Is if you don't take action on my project, you could be just like like the management team at Equifax. So here we are. It's time to update your slide decks. It's finally here. Now, I think last time, I don't remember how much we talked about this, but one of the other controversies that blew up, and I want to talk about it very briefly, is that their CISO, there was a big flap about how their CISO had a music degree, right? And and then there was, there was a flap that after she resigned, she dramatically changed her LinkedIn page so that it wasn't obvious that she only had a quote only had a music degree, and by the way, there's a lot of hoopla on Twitter and other social media about this, and personally, I think it's pretty concerning to me if we're going to say that you have to have some kind of a IT degree to be a senior executive, because I know a lot of very competent people who have English degrees and history degrees and those sorts of things. So the other thing that concerned me is kind of the appearance here, right? So now you've got a case where very publicly a company was shamed for having a quote less than credentialed cybersecurity executive, and I wonder if that's going to create or cause a lot of other companies to kind of have some introspection about the credentials of their own CIO or CISO.
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I'll try to be brief. I think that we are not doing ourselves any favors when we say things like, we need a lot more people in cybersecurity. We need a lot more people in InfoSec. We need more inclusion. We need more diversity. We need more thoughts. And then when something like this happens, immediately lambast somebody for having a music degree without knowing anything about that person's capabilities, history,
exactly.
Qualifications or anything. Now, if this individual was unqualified to be in that role, that's fine. That's something that we can certainly talk about. But to jump to this conclusion based purely upon a degree that's listed on her LinkedIn, I think is catty, naive, and damaging.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that there's multiple segments of the information security community, and we don't do a good job of differentiating among this. And I mean this as respectfully as I can, but I see a lot of folks who, their answer to IT security problems is, well, reload your Windows box with Linux and you'll be fine. That crap doesn't work in corporate America. And there's a lot of folks out there who are pontificating about this situation with Equifax who've never, ever worked in even a medium-sized organization in a senior role.
Right.
So I mean this kindly, but we've got to stop listening to everybody with a Twitter account in InfoSec because they don't all speak from the same level of experience and knowledge and mindset, and yet they're all considered to be the InfoSec community as one whole when they're not. There's very different segments of that community, have very different viewpoints, and we're not doing ourselves any favors by lumping them all together. I don't know how to fix that yet. This could be just a problem with InfoSec, but it's frustrating to me. Now, that being said, clearly some huge mistakes were made at Equifax, but we don't know enough about why and how those mistakes were made. It very well could have been this CISO was screaming at the top of her lungs, we need to fix these problems, and her leadership was shutting her down. We don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
So I'm not trying to make excuses for Equifax. Of course not. They deserve, because especially in the follow-on of this issue, they terribly handled this once it was even known. But this whole thing about the CISO having a music degree absolutely drove me crazy. And it was not a great thing for the information security community to do.
I'm in complete agreement. In hindsight. Oh, go ahead.
One other thing I'll say is I don't have a college degree.
Right.
Now, I'm not trying to be a CISO either, first off, but I feel relatively qualified to work in information security because I've been doing it for 20 some years. A degree is not everything. So you can't have it both ways, guys. You just can't. And this is where I think we're confusing these narratives like they're one voice, and they're not.
Yep.
Sorry, go on.
No. I would say that on the surface of it, it certainly seems like the CISO probably had some responsibility in it. But I guess the thing I want people to walk away with is I don't think that's related. It's not necessarily related to the fact that she had a music degree, and that's what I think we just need to drop that part and move on. I mean, I think it's at best it's toxic for the industry to be thinking like that. I think we need to have people who are competent to do the job they need to do. And that's the challenge of leadership teams, right? Is to figure out who's competent to do that job. And by the way, I would also say, one thing that's become clear to me as I move up the ladder, your technical acumen becomes less and less important every step of the way.
Well, that explains a lot about you on this show.
I know. The ability for you to surround yourself with people who are, though, and building effective, strong teams, that is important. That is the what you have to do. So,
and this is a very counterintuitive comment, but I have worked with CISOs who are both very technical, those who aren't. They both have pluses and minuses. I will tell you, very technical CISOs have a problem of being able to delegate and let go.
Yeah.
And trust their teams.
Yep.
And so then they want to micromanage and it doesn't scale.
Right. Yep. So anyway, let's see, what do we have in here? So there, I think the major details of the story really haven't changed much. 143 million Americans credit information was accessed, 400,000 UK citizens, 100,000 Canadians. I think there were 209,000 credit card numbers, if I recall. The stock went from $140 pre-breach to $104 right now. So, fairly material drop in stock price. But as we've seen, I would anticipate that will go back up. Now, something you mentioned that I think we need to spend a little bit of time on, and this is probably, if anything, it's the one thing that has been very public to us, and that is how they handled the breach and how they responded to it.
Yeah.
Now from the perspective of the message they released, I don't think there was necessarily anything wrong with that, but everything else was kind of a goat rodeo. They created this website. It was called, I think it was EquifaxSecurity2017.com, running on a WordPress site, using a Cloudflare signed SSL certificate. TLS certificate. I got to get out of that habit. I think OpenDNS for a time was actually categorizing it as a phishing site because it kind of looked like a phishing site.
The pain. Oh, the pain.
And so I think what happened, by the way, and I want to say what I think happened. I don't have any inside knowledge at all, but what seems to me to have happened here is that Equifax internally was very likely overwhelmed with the hoopla that happens in a response situation like this. So they probably hired some company to say, where they said, just handle it, right? Go and set it up, register the domain, do the whole thing, and some so they weren't able to use a subdomain of Equifax.com like they probably should have, which would have been a much more reasonable looking thing. But I strongly suspect the reason that this happened was because they farmed it out to I don't know exactly who. I think it was actually a communications or PR company that they hired to set that thing up. So lesson learned, right? Is once you've had the bad thing happen, that's the point at which people are really starting to watch you and judge how you respond.
Yeah, the bad thing is part of it, but the reaction can absolutely make or break. And that goes for many things in life.
Yeah.
choosing how you react to a problem is much more important typically.
Right. So, then by the way, there was, if that wasn't bad enough, some security researchers registered a domain that was similar, but not the same as this Equifax Security 2017, and I think it was like 2017 Equifax. It was the same words but in a different order, and the Equifax Twitter account tweeted out the incorrect domain, and it pointed people to this researcher's domain.
And left it up for a long time.
Yeah. But so these are by the way, these are the kinds of things, especially if you're a company like an Equifax or some credit card processor or something like that. These are the kinds of things that you probably want to have gamed out ahead of time. If something really horrible were to happen, you want to have a fairly well rehearsed plan so that you're not making it up as you go. And
Agreed.
To be candid, this seems like they were making their response up as they went.
So 2 thoughts. They very well could have gamed it out, and then senior executives said, "The hell with your initial plan. We're gonna."
Good point. That's a good point.
We know what we're doing.
What was the Mike Tyson quote? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the jaw.
Right. The other thing I would say is that I think that I've heard this repeatedly as part of the reaction problem coming out of Equifax is that we, the public who had our information leaked, are not their customers. And they're not used to thinking of us as their customers. So it's a tough problem. And they, there's a whole bunch of other silly things they did, like the pins that you could get generated to freeze your credit were timestamps.
Right.
Or the recovery information to get your PIN reset was all the information that was leaked. So just a lot of missteps that were self-inflicted damage at this point. Right.
Now, as far as we know, the actual data hasn't been made public, and in fact, there's now recent speculation is that it was actually a quote APT type breach. So, it may be that we never really see the data largely see the light of day. And part of me wonders if this is like Act 5 of the, Anthem, OPM, whoever else, breach of trying to assemble, a pretty comprehensive set of information about a certain set of people. I mean, that's not. I don't know. I'm not that smart.
Well, yeah, you're a senior executive now. We covered that earlier.
I never was. So anyway, this, to be honest, this unfortunately seems to be playing out like a slow motion train wreck. So I'm sure there'll be new things coming to light as time goes on. But I think there was one other thing that we talked about that we speculated on last show, and we now know for sure this show, and that is that yes, it absolutely was Struts that was used. Mm-hmm. It was the vulnerability. It was the Struts vulnerability disclosed in March, not the one in September. So we now know that as well, and we also know that apparently they didn't patch, or Equifax didn't patch the affected server until July, and so I think on the last show I speculated, well, conceivably they could have patched it, the day after it was exploited, right? And they just maintained persistence. But now we know that in fact it was, that the site had been compromised for quite some time before it was patched. But again, I think I continue to hold my ground on having worked in large IT shops before, and I'm not using this. I'm not saying this as a defense. I'm saying this as a reality that a lot of these larger enterprise applications, yes, they should go away, but they are often unwieldy and difficult to patch. And the person who wrote it retired 2 years ago, and I don't know anything about Equifax's case. I'm just telling you what the average story I hear about these kinds of things.
If we really, if we did like an NTSB investigation, a contributing cause for a lot of these is the initial design and deployment of these applications,
right?
That aren't built with the concept of rapid, regular patching of production gear in mind.
Correct. Yes.
And when we deploy these applications, that comes with a whole lot of baggage that I don't think a lot of companies accept.
Right.
And they very quickly ignore or step aside or just kind of move on from the long tail management and support of these organizations until something like this happens.
Right.
And the other thing that's interesting is this is actually a bit of a rare thing these days, which is a perimeter breach against a perimeter facing asset. We've seen so many lately that come at us through phishing attack or through email or targeted endpoint first.
Yeah, this is pretty rare lately.
But the majority of our philosophy grew up around defending the perimeter.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I will say that a lot of these applications, these large scale applications, tend to be so complicated and brittle that they will often only go through, 1 or 2 update cycles a year. Now, again, I don't have any insight into what's going on here, and I don't know if that was the case. But it is, by the way, one of the hopes I have for the move towards the agile DevOps thing, where where code is released on a much more frequent basis, that kind of enables, I hope, at least over time, is things like the monstrous applications hopefully wither away. We see the move towards that more agile, DevOpsy type model enable more rapid patching so that things like this hopefully don't happen.
Aw, that's cute.
Let
me know how that works out for you.
I know.
But we do need to do something different.
Yes.
Whether it's micro virtualization with containers that can easily be swapped out, whether it's load balanced sites that can easily be redirected. We've got to build with the concept of rapid, regular maintenance in mind. Mm-hmm. And we're not doing that today.
Yeah, I will say the last thing I'll say on this one is a lot of companies, especially larger companies, when an application has been around for a long time, quite often the business strategy will change, and there'll be a new vision for what the future should hold, and the business will often heavily invest in that new thing at the detriment of the old thing. And so again, don't have any insight, but it is a common practice in large companies to deprecate things that are in production and kind of keep them on life support and focus, all investment on something new. Again, I don't have any idea if that's what's going on here.
We're migrating our customers over to the new platform. The old platform will be there for the next year or two. Then we'll turn it off after we get everybody migrated. Oh, these 4 customers didn't want to migrate yet.
Right.
And that is where we end up.
Right. I've seen that an unfortunate number of times. Mm-hmm. So anyway, moving on to our next story. So there was big new news this past week. So Deloitte had an incident. So Deloitte, which by the way Gartner called one of actually the top cybersecurity consultancy for the 5th year in a row, had a problem. So this story comes from KrebsOnSecurity.com, and the title is Source: Deloitte breach affected all company email admin accounts. All right, so publicly, Deloitte has said that there was indeed an incident, and they've that affected a few clients, and apparently they've notified those clients. and the apparently the thing that was breached here, or at least the damaging thing that was breached, was apparently their email system. And you can imagine a consultancy's email will probably contain a lot of sensitive information about, there a lot of different companies, probably everything from penetration testing reports to, due diligence on acquisitions and everywhere in between. So there is no speculation on which of their customers were impacted or what kinds of data specifically was released, but there was a reference to just a few customers being impacted. Now, the story here with Krebs is that apparently he got in contact with a quote knowledgeable insider who apparently has some inside knowledge on what's going on, and said that this is
typically those are the disgruntled IT security folks who weren't listened to.
Yeah, probably, or it could be PwC, right?
Or yeah, or we're purely speculating here, guys. Don't.
Yeah. I mean, the point is we don't have any idea who, but. I assume Krebs did some amount of due diligence on who he was talking to. So.
Krebs is very credible. Don't not questioning that. Just we don't know who he actually talked to. We're just being silly.
Right. So anyway, this inside source says that the breach is much deeper and broader than is being publicly acknowledged. They said that though Deloitte has said that the investigation on the affected systems is complete, this particular source says that they still don't know how the bad guys got in or how long they were there. And then they actually link potentially, and I think this may be a little tenuous link, and depending on the role of the source, it may or may not be relevant. But apparently back in October of 2016, there was a company-wide email, and there's a screenshot of that email in this article that that ordered everybody in the company to change their passwords. And so there's a kind of a tenuous link that maybe that was related to this particular breach, but again, we don't really know. There was also apparently some number of gigabytes of data being transferred to a site in the UK. There's an allegation in here that the company's office in Nashville, known as Hermitage, is where the breach is thought to have begun. I'm not exactly sure how they could think that and not know how they got in. So that I'm sure there's a lot of details that we just don't have any insight into. And then, I think that the other thing the source has said is that he or she is concerned that they haven't actually fully disclosed the incident to all of the potentially impacted customers. So, a lot of words to say. They got breached.
Meanwhile, Equifax is very happy Deloitte got breached.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So now that kind of dovetails into a second report, which comes from the Register, and the title there is "Deloitte is a sitting duck. Key systems with RDP open, VPN and proxy login details leak."
So here's the next takeaway. As soon as you actually have a breach, you get a really nice free pen test on anything associated with your company.
Yeah, all of the OSINT people go into overdrive trying to find everything they can find, and so find stuff they did. Right, there were apparently employees posting VPN login passwords on his Google Plus account, which is probably okay because nobody actually uses Google Plus, so it's probably pretty safe there.
Oh, low blow!
I know.
Now, before we go any further, I just want to say, okay, contrast this. We should take like 6 other reference companies and see if they could find the same thing for those companies. Like, how
Yeah,
unique
exactly.
is this, right?
Right.
It's a signal and noise thing again.
Yeah, well, it absolutely is, and so they also pointed out that there was there was some similar information in user IDs, passwords, host names in GitHub. Some people found on Shodan a whole bunch of systems exposed to the internet, including one that was apparently a Active Directory controller with RDP open to the internet, and by the way, apparently missing some patches.
That's ugly.
Yeah, that's certainly not a good look. The one thing that I will say, and you hit on it a little bit, back in the other article, I think they mentioned that Deloitte has something like 237,000, I want to say, employees. So it's a very large company, and they operate in a lot of different countries. And I believe, I don't know this to be fact, but I think a lot of these consultancies work this way, that each country is more or less an autonomous entity, and there's kind of a loose.
Yeah, it's almost like a franchise.
Yeah, model. Exactly. Yeah, and so one of the problems I had with the title about the all company email was affected was, I'm not sure that really makes sense. So if you actually go go in and start looking at DNS records like I did, a lot of their different operating companies have dramatically different mail exchanger records. Like, some are using Ironport, some are using Message Labs, some are using so it's all over the map, and that tells me it's probably unlikely all that's feeding back into one central email system. And I'm not even sure that they have one central internal network. So point is, take these kinds of flashy headlines with a little bit of salt. I mean, certainly this is a bad, not a good thing to have happen by any stretch of the imagination. But when you have a very, very large company with a lot of employees and a lot of autonomy between these operating units, it's been my experience. I mean, I even saw this with a smaller company where we had, foreign entities. That people are setting up stuff everywhere, right? And it is a cat herding exercise. And that this is one of the major challenges of working in a large company. And I'm not sure any large company, to my knowledge, really has the solution there. It's a difficult thing when you got 200,000 employees or 200,000 plus employees. There's going to be bad behavior of posting stuff on the internet, and if this tells us anything, it's you probably ought to be either yourself or hiring some other company to be trawling for that stuff. Yes, it's more expensive, but damn it, if you're breached, you get the register writing this nasty thing about you, whether or not it had anything to do with the breach. And by the way, I mean, you should be looking at that stuff anyway, because it's putting your company at risk, but it certainly adds to the fuel to the fire in the wake of a breach.
Yeah, you hit on a lot of the notes I had jotted down too, and I completely agree. The other thing that I had that you didn't touch on was a lot of people are like, well, they've got all these IT consultants and security departments, and this is their best pavilion. What's going on? Well, I can tell you, having worked for many InfoSec companies, including consultancies, it is incredibly rare that those billable resources that are customer facing are in any way involved with internal corporate IT and IT security, for lots of reasons, right, wrong, or different. First off, they're billable resources. They're the commodity the company is selling.
Right.
They need to be out in front of customers.
Right.
And they need to be making money for the business. Beyond that, there's also a ton of corporate politics involved. You've got a lot of silos there, and if you're the CISO and suddenly some business guy's coming and saying he wants to bring his resources in and tell you how to do your job, there's a lot of folks who bristle at that, as well as the concept of, the internal IT security department is a different organization with different priorities and different reward systems than the external billable assets and billable consultants. So they have different prioritization. And finally, just because, let's say they did do that, let's say that those really good billable assets came in and spent a month with the internal corporate IT, aside from all of the decentralization mentioned, they could come up with all the best practices in the world, but that doesn't mean that the budgets and the resources and the authority was granted to the IT security department to actually invoke any of those.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of a misnomer to say, well, they've got all these amazing IT security resources out in front of customers. Why aren't they helping their own company? That rarely ever happens for lots and lots of reasons.
Yeah, I liken it to it's the cobbler's children, right? The cobbler's children have no shoes. And yeah, I've we both worked at a smaller security company, and I know you've worked at a bunch since. And I think it's, to be honest, I think the problem is more pronounced at security companies. I mean, having worked at security companies and non-security companies, I actually think security companies' internal security programs tend to be worse because of that, right? There's this view that the companies, just by virtue of who the company is, they're doing it right. And and the other thing I would say is, if you have an internal person who is an exceptional security person, they're not going to stay in that position.
Right.
They're going to become very quickly externally focused. They're going to be generating money
if they want to.
Well, yeah, but
there's also a lot of politics of, don't tell me how to do my job.
Sure.
Sure. It's easier for you to come in and just show up for a week. You're not dealing with the politics. I remember when I was working at a company internally that also was a managed service provider for firewalls, and there was a huge corporate debate of whether or not the managed service provider portion of the company should run the company's firewalls. And then you get into things like segregation of duties. You get into things of trust and oversight, and it just gets complicated very quickly. So I don't mean to beat this one to the ground, but just understand the business offering a company sells to third parties is rarely ever what is being used internally as well.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is, if you are in a security company and if you are leading the security team in a security company, you ought to be on the lookout for this kind of thing happening, because it is really damaging, right? I mean, I think you have a headwind, and you may not even know that you have a headwind, because of the things we just talked about. But if something bad happens, there's really, we're going to get all sorts of hate mail or in angry tweets saying this doesn't matter. They were irresponsible. They should, they knew they had the talent to do the right thing and they didn't do it. And that is absolutely true. But the fact remains, it's just a common, state of things, right? I mean, we can hate that that it's that way, but there it is.
Another thing I remember from when I was doing IT security at a security company is you got every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the company poking at you.
Right.
And criticizing and laying out their opinion. So some security departments start getting very insular and very defensive against that and blocking that off. Again, not good behavior, but it goes into where these things come from. So now the flip side to all this is that this does hurt Deloitte's credibility as a provider. Exactly. Because their customers will look at this and go, exactly what we just said. What the hell? You guys can't get your own house in order and you want to come tell me how to do mine? The only flip side of that is the type of companies they consult with and the advice they're giving doesn't automatically apply to Deloitte, because it's a different company, a different brand, a different, it's not like all security advice is equally relevant to all companies,
right,
in all situations. But we're kind of beating this one to the ground, I think.
Yeah. My point is, if you're in a security company, just be on the lookout for, for this kind of behavior, right? I mean, and try to counter it, because it's not only is it not doing your customers any favors in terms of a data breach, but also it's going to create some commercial problems for you from a reputation standpoint. So that there is some intangible benefit to a security company doing internal security right, despite whatever the internal management may believe. So anyway, that's that's what I wanted to say about that. So anyway, that is all. Hopefully, I'm kind of back into the groove. DerbyCon's over, so I think hopefully, everything willing, we'll be back again next week.
Hope so. I know you're traveling a lot right now and that you're sick, so but I'll be here.
All right. Well, you can find links to the stories we talked about today on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Khaled on Twitter at Lurg, and you can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we'll talk again real soon. Take care.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.